Steelers Nation, full attention, because this week in Pittsburgh has exploded with updates, doubts, and decisions that could completely change the course of the next game. The atmosphere inside the organization is electric. It's pressure, it's anticipation, it's that kind of tension that only shows up when the season reaches a decisive moment. Between medical evaluations, internal debates, and choices that will directly affect Sunday, there's one truth: what happens in the next few days will decide everything. So show some love and hit that like if you were black and gold with pride. Let's dive into the breakdown. There's a lot of heavy stuff for us to unpack. My friends, the Rodgers is notorious for playing through pain. Whether it was the partially torn hamstring last year, the knee issues, or even a finger injury he's been dealing with since Week 9 warm-ups, the man simply does not sit out. But now he's juggling an injury to his throwing hand and a fractured wrist on the other. It's not just pain tolerance, it's functional capability. Does he risk making it worse? And perhaps even more urgent, can he execute at a level that actually helps this team win? Because the last 3 games haven't featured the version of Rodgers anyone expected. And with limited practice, maybe one day at best, this decision carries weight beyond his reputation for toughness. It's why some fans and analysts lean toward Mason Rudolph for this game. Not because he's the better quarterback, but because he's fully healthy, fully functional, and doesn't require the offense to adjust around 2 injured hands. But if Rodgers is cleared, and if Tomlin continues speaking the way he did today, Rodgers will be on that field. That's just who he is, and that's how Tomlin operates. While all eyes were on the quarterback situation, Tomlin delivered another update that sparked an even bigger outcry among the fan base. He said Darius Slay will immediately return to his starting role opposite Joey Porter Jr. now that he's cleared from concussion protocol, moving ahead of James Pierre, a move that has been met with disbelief, and honestly, for good reason. Pierre has been playing elite football, to the point where the numbers put him at the very top of the league in coverage performance according to PFF. Meanwhile, Slay is allowing a 70% completion rate, more touchdowns, more yards per target, and a much higher passer rating allowed. Pierre, on the other hand, is allowing less than 25% of passes thrown his way to be completed. That's not just solid play, that's lockdown football. And it's not like this is a small sample fluke. Pierre stepped in during the Chargers game and immediately elevated the entire secondary. His 90.7 coverage grade is the highest in the NFL right now, yet the coaching staff insists on returning Slay to the lineup simply because he is healthy. Tomlin said, Slay will step back in if healthy. James Pierre deserves time, but Slay will step back in when healthy. That phrasing tells you everything. Pierre deserves time, yet Slay automatically starts. It sounds less like performance-based decision-making and more like salary-based obligation. Then comes the ripple effect no one can ignore. If Slay is locked in as the CB2, and Pierre is viewed more as rotational depth, then why was Asante Samuel Jr. signed? What role does he have? Because right now, based strictly on what the Steelers themselves are signaling, ASJ might be as low as CB4 or even CB6 when factoring in Ramsey and Eccles. And that raises questions about whether he'll even remain in Pittsburgh. He can be poached off the practice squad, and if a team like Philadelphia, his father's former team, comes calling, offering snaps and a legitimate role, why would he stay? Especially if he feels boxed out behind veterans the staff seems committed to regardless of performance. Nothing in the file says he wants to leave, of course, but the situation creates the kind of pressure that makes departures possible. Tomlin also updated several other injuries. Jaylen Warren is expected to play this week after being cleared to return against Cincinnati, though the team held him out for precaution since the game was already under control. Alex Highsmith remains more questionable with his pec issue, and we'll have to see whether he can go. The team feels comfortable with Nick Herbig if Highsmith can't dress. Darius Slay and Cole Holcomb are also expected to return. Then there's the quieter but very important shift at quarterback behind Rodgers and Rudolph. Tomlin hinted that Howard will get legitimate first-team reps this week. That's significant because he didn't get those during training camp due to his finger injury, and since returning he has mainly run scout team duties. But now, with Rodgers day-to-day, the Steelers are one snap away from Howard potentially playing real NFL football for the first time. This week's practice reps feel like preparation for exactly that scenario. Last week's game was proof of how quickly things can change, and if Rodgers doesn't play and Rudolph starts, Howard becomes the next man up with zero warning. With Rodgers pushing through injuries and Tomlin preparing backups more aggressively, the question practically asks itself, given the stakes, the inconsistencies, and the controversial decisions stacking up, what do you think, Steelers fans? Should Rodgers really be the one starting this Sunday? Picking up right where we left off, the the pressure surrounding this quarterback situation grows heavier with every passing day of preparation. As the week moves forward, the Steelers aren't just assessing Rodgers' pain tolerance, they're analyzing how the offense responds in practice with Mason Rudolph and Will Howard sharing meaningful reps. Tomlin made it clear this week would offer opportunities for both of them, especially with Rodgers sidelined until at least Friday. Will Howard, despite spending most of his time running scout team, has earned praise for being sharp, attentive, and ready to absorb whatever is thrown his way. That matters now more than ever, because as much as fans focus on who starts, the staff must prepare for the very real possibility that Pittsburgh's fate could rest in the hands of a quarterback who hasn't taken a snap of NFL action yet. Howard suited up for the first time last week, and suddenly the reality became clear. The Steelers are one play away from seeing him take the field. When Tomlin says there will be an uptick in his opportunities this week, that isn't casual mention, that's deliberate planning. If Rodgers sits and Rudolph starts, the margin for error shrinks dramatically. The staff saw firsthand last week how quickly circumstances can shift, and this time, the fallback option would be a rookie seeing live action for the first time. These reps aren't symbolic, they're survival reps, and the team knows it. But even with all this focus on quarterbacks, the unease surrounding the defensive backfield doesn't fade. It only intensifies. The outrage from fans regarding the decision to bench James Pierre in favor of Darius Slay continues to ripple across the city. Every statistical comparison, every coverage breakdown, every PFF grade leans toward Pierre being the better performer this season, yet the staff remains committed to Slay stepping right back in. Whether it's experience, salary, or simply loyalty to a veteran, none of the explanations align with what the film or the numbers show. The file makes it clear, Pierre has been playing elite-level football, and still he's the one being pushed back. That affects more than just Pierre, it casts a shadow over the entire rotation. The presence of Asante Samuel Jr. becomes an unanswered question hovering over the defensive meeting rooms. If Slay is locked in as CB2 and Pierre gets only rotational work, then where exactly does ASJ fit? With Ramsey and Eccles also contributing, this is a rare situation where a talented young corner could find himself buried on a depth chart that doesn't reflect merit so much as rigid structure. The possibility of him being poached becomes real, not because the Steelers want to lose him, but because other teams with immediate cornerback needs can offer what Pittsburgh currently cannot: a clear, playable role. No one is claiming a departure is guaranteed, but the circumstances described in the file show how precarious his situation could become if the coaching staff doesn't carve out a plan for him soon. Meanwhile, the injury updates bring small relief. Jaylen Warren trending toward playing is a meaningful lift, especially with the offense needing every ounce of consistency it can muster. Alex Highsmith remains a true question mark, but the coaching staff's trust in Nick Herbig provides at least some reassurance. The team expects Slay and Holcomb to return, reinforcing the defense in areas that have been stretched thin. But the bigger narrative of the week still revolves around how this team handles its most important positions, quarterback and cornerback, and how those decisions reflect a philosophy that sometimes seems to conflict with on-field reality. So as preparations for Chicago intensify and the days tick down toward Rodgers' Friday deadline, the uncertainty continues to define this week in Pittsburgh. Not just uncertainty about who will start, but uncertainty about how much the team is willing to prioritize recent performance over reputation, availability over fighting spirit, and long-term potential over short-term hierarchy. It's a fascinating moment for this franchise, filled with tension and possibilities depending on which direction Tomlin chooses to lean as the week closes. Now I want to know from you, with everything happening at quarterback, at corner, and across this roster, what do you think is the single most important decision Pittsburgh needs to get right heading into this game? Starting exactly where we left off, the weight of these decisions grows even heavier as the Steelers continue preparing for Chicago. The quarterback situation is still hovering over the entire facility, and each practice rep this week feels like a quiet referendum on readiness, trust, and the direction this offense will take if Rodgers cannot go. Mason Rudolph has already proven he can steady the team in short notice, but now the coaches are treating every snap as a potential dress rehearsal for Sunday. If Rodgers isn't cleared, Rudolph must be more than just reliable. He has to be fully in rhythm with an offense that might need to run at a different tempo than the one Rodgers prefers. That means timing, adjustments, and communication all need to accelerate quickly during the few days they have left. And then there's Will Howard. His presence alone changes the atmosphere. The coaching staff knows that having a rookie one snap away is a risk that you can't simply ignore, especially when your starter is battling 2 injuries and your backup hasn't had a full week of QB1 preparation in a long while. Howard's development becomes more urgent by the hour. Up to this point he has only operated through scout team work, but now those first team reps are meant to bridge the gap between unfamiliarity and readiness. No one inside the building wants to be forced into playing him this soon, but the team is acknowledging reality. Last week was a reminder that one awkward fall, one misstep, one unfortunate twist can send the entire depth chart into a scramble. If that moment arrives again, Howard must be prepared to step into an NFL game with confidence, structure, and enough command to avoid letting the offense collapse around him. But even all this quarterback tension still can't overshadow the storm surrounding the secondary. Fans continue to push back against the decision to start Darius Slay over James Pierre, and the frustration hasn't cooled at all. When a player is performing at a league-leading level the way Pierre has, benching him feels like a step backward. The file makes the performance gap undeniable. Completion percentage allowed, coverage grade, yards per target. It's not even close. Pierre has earned the right to be on the field. And yet, the coaching staff is choosing Slay strictly based on health and presumably veteran status. These types of decisions affect team chemistry more than people realize. Players see effort. They see production. They know who's outperforming who in practice and on game day. When a teammate plays at an elite level and still gets moved aside, it sends a message, whether intended or not, that merit doesn't always translate to opportunity. And that's when frustration can spread quickly in a locker room, especially among younger players still trying to carve out their place. Which brings us back to Asante Samuel Jr. His situation is one of the most precarious details in the entire file because it highlights how a talented corner could be stuck without a clear path to the field. If Slay remains the locked-in CB2 and Pierre becomes rotational depth, ASJ has almost nowhere to go other than emergency or developmental snaps. No corner wants to live in limbo, especially when other teams, potentially ones with clear starting paths, could come calling. Philadelphia is a natural example, given his father's history there and their need for cornerback help. Again, nothing in the file says he wants to leave, but the situation creates the conditions where leaving becomes a very real possibility if an opportunity arises. Pittsburgh risks losing a promising young defender simply because the depth chart refuses to move in step with performance. Meanwhile, the smaller injury updates give the team some breathing room. Jaylen Warren returning is a major relief, especially with the offense needing every bit of explosiveness and consistency it can get. Highsmith's status remains murky, but the coaching staff's confidence in Herbig softens the blow, and Holcomb's and Slay's expected returns add stability, even if Slay's role has sparked debate. These pieces matter in the larger picture, but none carry the same gravity as the choices looming over the quarterback room and the secondary. As the week builds toward the final injury evaluation on Friday, the Steelers find themselves at a crossroads where every decision echoes louder than usual. Who starts at quarterback could decide how competitive this team can be on Sunday. Who starts at cornerback could determine whether the defense continues trending upward or takes a step back. And how the staff handles emerging talents like Will Howard and Asante Samuel Jr. could shape parts of this roster long beyond Week 12. So now that you've heard the full situation laid out, here's the real question. As the Steelers prepare for this massive week, what do you believe Pittsburgh absolutely must do to give themselves the best chance not just to compete, but to build momentum going forward? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and stick around, because more Steelers coverage is coming up, and there's another video on the screen right now waiting for you. And as this discussion unfolds further, the weight of these roster decisions becomes even more apparent because nothing about this week feels routine. Every update, every comment from Tomlin, every evaluation behind closed doors is steering the Steelers toward a moment that could define the next stretch of the season. What makes this even more compelling is how each decision intersects with another. Rodgers' status affects Rudolph and Howard. Slay's return affects Pierre and indirectly creates tension for Asante Samuel Jr. Highsmith's uncertainty impacts Herbig. Warren's health shapes the offensive rhythm. In a week where the opponent is almost secondary, the real battle is happening internally as the Steelers try to align availability, performance, and long-term planning in a way that doesn't derail the momentum they finally built last week. You can feel how delicate this balancing act is. Rodgers wants to play, and history suggests he will do everything in his power to make that happen, but a quarterback navigating two hand injuries is not a small detail. If he plays compromised, the offense risks stalling. If he sits, the team hands the offense to Rudolph, who has proven he can hold things together, but whose ability to carry a full game plan for a must-win matchup hasn't been tested this season. And behind all of that sits the reality that if something unexpected happens, well, Howard could be the one walking onto that field. These layers turn a simple injury update into a domino effect that touches each corner of the roster. The same goes for the cornerback decisions. Reinstalling Slay as the starter doesn't just change who lines up opposite Joey Porter Jr., it shifts the entire defensive dynamic. Pierre's production has been too strong to ignore, and every snap he loses feels like a missed opportunity for the defense to maximize its best performers. Meanwhile, Asante Samuel Jr. is caught in the consequences of those choices, watching the depth chart solidify above him in ways that don't reflect his talent or his potential fit in the system. It's the type of quiet tension that often goes unnoticed outside the building, but inside it carries real significance for a player's future and for the overall development of the secondary. What makes this week so fascinating is that all these storylines, as unrelated as they seem, are converging at the same time. A team can handle one controversy, one injury, one depth chart shakeup, but when all of it hits simultaneously, the coaching staff has to make decisions that are not only correct in the short term but don't cost them in the long term. The file makes it clear this coaching staff is confident in its process, but confidence alone doesn't erase skepticism, especially when the decisions appear to contradict on-field performance. That's what makes this moment so compelling for fans. It isn't just about who plays on Sunday. It's about whether the choices reflect what's best for the team rather than what's comfortable, traditional, or contract-driven. It's about whether a coaching staff can adapt when the evidence demands it. It's about whether the team is willing to trust the players who have earned their snaps rather than defaulting to the ones who have tenure or salary on their side. And it's about preparing for every scenario, including the possibility that an inexperienced quarterback or an underutilized defender might suddenly be thrust into the spotlight. So now that we've gone even deeper into how all these factors collide heading into this pivotal week, I want to hear from you one more time. If you had to choose only one positional decision for the coaching staff to get absolutely perfect this week, which one matters the most to you, quarterback, cornerback, or something else entirely? And carrying this forward, the deeper you look into everything happening inside the Steelers building this week, the more you realize how unusual this moment truly is. It's not chaos, and it's not disorganization, it's something far more complicated. It's a convergence of timing, health, performance, and coaching philosophy all crashing into the same narrow window before a critical game. And the closer we get to Sunday, the clearer it becomes that every small decision has the power to shift the trajectory of this team. Consider the quarterback room again, because no matter how many updates we examine, the pressure there keeps increasing. Rodgers' desire to play is unquestionable, but the practicality of letting a quarterback with a damaged throwing hand and a fractured wrist take the field is impossible to ignore. It's the kind of decision that tests a coaching staff's discipline. Is it worth risking further injury? Is it worth sacrificing offensive fluidity? Rudolph has shown he can run the system, and the team responded well to him last week. But confidence in a backup doesn't automatically answer the long-term question. Can you trust him to handle the weight of a full game plan in a moment where the standings demand precision? And behind both of them, Will Howard continues to be the quiet storyline that could explode into national attention at any moment. The coaches aren't treating his practice reps as symbolic anymore, they're treating them as insurance. Necessary insurance. Because no matter who starts, injuries don't care about depth charts, experience levels, or timing. Howard has been sharp in limited work, but translating that into readiness to actually step onto an NFL field requires more than natural talent. It requires exposure, rhythm, and the kind of mental preparation that comes from being told, be ready. Your moment might not wait. The defensive backfield remains just as complicated. Slay returning to the lineup as the automatic starter brings a reaction that the file makes very clear. Most observers don't understand it. Pierre has outplayed him. Pierre has done everything a coach could ask for. Pierre has delivered numbers that place him at the top of the league. And yet, he's the one being pushed aside. This isn't a small rotation adjustment. It's a decision that directly shapes how the defense will operate against Chicago and beyond. And this affects far more than the upcoming game. It affects trust. It affects flow. It affects the younger corners watching closely to see how performance is valued inside this system. Asante Samuel Jr. sits at the center of that tension. His situation described in the file makes his future feel like a question with too many variables. How long can a talented corner accept being boxed out before considering other opportunities? How long can a coaching staff afford to let a potential contributor sit idle while veterans with inconsistent production take priority? These aren't hypothetical frustrations. These are the realities presented by the decisions laid out this week. Even the smaller injury updates ripple outward. Jaylen Warren returning is more than a simple note. It stabilizes the offense. His explosiveness and consistency create breathing room for whatever quarterback takes the field. Highsmith's uncertain status puts Herbig in a position where he may need to prove once again he can deliver high-impact snaps on limited notice. Holcomb's return adds structure to the second level of the defense, and Slay's return, for better or worse, reshapes the coverage alignment entirely. This is the kind of week where everything feels like it matters just a little bit more than usual. A week where preparation is done with heightened awareness. A week where every unit, every player, every coach feels the weight of decisions that could either tighten the team's identity or expose more cracks in it. And as Pittsburgh inches its way toward kickoff, the real question becomes whether these choices will bring stability or raise even more questions once the ball is snapped. So now, as all these moving parts continue to take shape, tell me this. When you look at how the Steelers are handling this pivotal moment, do you feel confident in the direction the coaching staff is taking, or do these decisions leave you more concerned heading into Sunday? And continuing from that exact point, the tension inside the Steelers facility only grows thicker as every hour passes, because nothing about this week allows for comfort, hesitation, or blind faith. Every decision the staff makes is being watched, analyzed, and questioned, not by outsiders, but by the very fans who understand this team better than anyone. And when you look at how all these storylines intersect, you start to realize that this isn't just a tough week of preparation. It's a week that will reveal whether this coaching staff is willing to trust the reality in front of them instead of the assumptions they've carried into the season. On the quarterback side, the silence around Rodgers' actual functionality speaks volumes. Sure, he's pushing to play. Of course he is. That's who he's been his entire career. But there's a difference between passion and practicality, and right now those two forces are colliding. A quarterback dealing with a throwing hand issue and a fractured wrist on the other hand is not a small, manageable detail. It affects his mechanics, his comfort, his ball security, and his grip on every throw, and those are the exact details that separate elite quarterbacks from struggling ones. The last 3 games already showed he hasn't been himself, even before factoring in the latest injury. Now Tomlin must choose between respecting Rodgers' desire to compete and protecting the team from the consequences of putting a limited quarterback on the field. Meanwhile, Mason Rudolph isn't just an emergency option anymore, he's the realistic alternative. He's healthy, he's functional, he just stepped into a high-pressure game and steadied the ship. But whether he can do that for 4 full quarters in a planned start, not a reactive one, remains to be seen. That's why the reps he's getting this week carry more weight than usual, and the quiet development happening behind them with Will Howard is even more important. Howard isn't being groomed for the distant future, he's being prepared for the possibility of being thrown into a real game right now if something goes wrong.